English translation, 654th Contact Thursday, the 16th of June, 2016, 9:51 hours.
Hello, dear friend. You are already here in the morning, but I did not expect you for the correction until the afternoon. But be welcomed.
Hello, dear friend, and I have not just come now, but have been here for an hour and have read in these interesting writings.
Then you could have called me, because I have been on my feet for quite some time.
I could have probably done that, but I found the reading interesting, which is why I called you only now.
That's fine. If you permit, then the following personal question.
Naturally.
Well, thank you. But may I ask why you were so short on Orgone during our last conversation, and did not give a more detailed explanation? Somehow the whole answer to my question was a little poor. Bernadette and I assumed that maybe you did not want to get involved further because of the directives.
With that you thought right? Because more than what I have explained as a short answer to your question, I was not allowed and am not allowed to name according to our directives. Because the whole extent of what concerns the Orgone, as it was named by Reich, is not only useful and positive, but also in very negative and dangerous way.
We also thought something like that, thinking about the how and what. It would be interesting for me to know why the Orgone was called solidified solar energy.
I do not know because I did not orient myself further in this respect. And besides, I cannot say whether this name comes from Reich himself, because I found it in a written description.
But can you explain something about the negative effects of the Orgone?
No, that would already indicate a certain direction, which I am not allowed to mention as a result of our directives. I may only say that the evaluation of the Orgone in a negative way would have very serious consequences of different kinds. Because the Earth humans cannot handle in a responsible way the corresponding knowledge and the resulting inventions and products. And this has been proven since time immemorial by the fact that each and everything of a chemical, physical and technical nature ever invented and created by human beings on Earth, etc., instead of being used only in a good and positive way, was usually used negatively and very often malignantly, fatally, irresponsibly, and destructively. And this will continue to happen as we are bound by our directives in this regard, which do not allow us to release to the Earth humans any knowledge that would lead to the negative, the evil, the deadly, and the destructive, or could simply be used in such ways. And this refers to anything and everything that can be abused in any way and can cause harm to man, nature, fauna, and flora, the atmosphere, the air we breathe, and the planet itself. It is a fact that since time immemorial, all good and positive things have not only been evaluated in a good and positive way by the Earth humans, but have also inevitably been applied in a negative, destructive, and violent way, which will continue to be the case for a long time to come.
I understand, because even the simplest good and valuable achievements have been transformed since time immemorial by Earthlings into evil, deadly and destructive things, such as the simple chair, which was transformed into a torture seat, and also into the electric murder machine, electric chair. The useful axe also became a murder weapon in the form of the battle axe and the knife a drop knife for the guillotine. But also chemical and partly quite useful substances were abused as poison cocktails for the exercise of prescribed and to be carried out death sentences, as well as nuclear substances in order to murder insidiously people or to destroy cities with atomic bombs, and to murder hundreds of thousands of people in the process. Also, healing drugs and toxins have been abused since time immemorial to murder people, as well as many other things which were invented as weapons, and with which hundreds of millions of people have been murdered in wars, acts of terrorism and riots, etc., since time immemorial. But it would probably be pointless to list any more such examples.
But everything you say is factual and true, because there is hardly anything in the Earth humans' inventions, knowledge, and achievements that are not transformed for malicious, deadly, and destructive purposes.
I know. Because even water is used in various ways for torture and murder, such as waterboarding, a torture method of simulated drowning, or the garrote or neck iron for strangling a human being, a Spanish method of execution. But also the simple rope is used for killing by hanging and strangling, as well as the Iron Maiden, etc., and it is hard to believe that even simple eating forks, hay and pitchforks, scythes, all kinds of sports equipment and also pins, knitting needles, cooking pans, eating bowls, letter openers, paperweights, electric cables, necks and handkerchiefs, finger rings, brooches, body belts and shoes as well as books, etc., have been and are repeatedly misused for manslaughter and murder. And in fact, there would be countless other things and basically good and valuable inventions of Earth humans, which however were abused and transformed for torture, murder, and killing and for warfare and continue to be. Bernadette and I looked at your brief explanation in this way, which made everything clear to us.
So do not need any more words about it.
We'll be lost. Well, then the question whether I can again address something that arises from a bulletin reader's question?
You know that's unquestionable.
Just thought you might have something special you might want to bring up. All right then. Look here, that's what I've written here. Why I need your help to answer the reader's question correctly, and I think other bulletin readers are interested as well. I think it is necessary to explain when, how, and why the values of the spiritual teachings were integrated into the confused Buddhist teachings. Well then, the reader's question first.
Question. You have written in your books and writings that of earthly religions, Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam, only a few explanations are acceptable and correct. Can you explain this in more detail, just how it must be understood? E. Friedrich, Germany.
My answer. My expressions that in earth religions, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, only certain few parts are acceptable and correct, refer only to values such as those given according to the ancient teaching of the truth, teaching of the spirit, teaching of the life, respectively, doctrine of the mind, respectively, teaching of the prophets of the primordial prophet, Nokodemion. In this respect, however, only few values are contained in the Buddhist, Christian, and Islamic religious teachings, whereby these in no way trace back to these religions themselves, but to Nokodemion's teachings or spiritual teachings. Billy.
In my opinion, it would now be necessary for you to be more specific about how everything has turned out. You have already explained the whole thing to me once in a private conversation, but I think that you could repeat and explain what was explained to me at that time in short form, because everything is more familiar to you than to me.
Yeah, I can do that. The spiritual teaching has brought two old Lyran, distant descendants from the emigration power that came to Earth 13,500 years ago as emigrants, 2,891 Earth years ago to the eastern part of Earth, respectively to a larger group of Earth humans who lived in a mountainous region of the country today called Burma, respectively Myanmar. Note Billy, formerly Burma/Myanmar. This group, which comprised 309 female and male Earth humans, formed a small order with an educational institution which secretly lasted until the beginning of the 20th century. This group was able to survive into the modern age through constant descendants, but various members migrated from the community, mainly to the areas of northern India at that time. From 1814, however, the group began to slowly die out as a result of increasing deaths, and by 1850 the group had grown to 32 people of different ages. So it has to be said repeatedly that nearly 2,900 years ago, a small secret order with a small educational institution was founded in the former area of today's Burma, where the spiritual doctrine was taught, whereby this order existed until 1917, nearly 2,900 years. From 1856, my father Schwath maintained contact with the senior leader of the order for about 50 years, whom he often visited and whom he also taught in Satipatthäna meditation. The small order at that time still comprised 4 persons. of whom the leader of the order died in 1907, followed by the remaining 3 persons of the order, who were also very old, and thus the secret order came to an end. The then instructed earthlings of the mentioned group, which initially comprised 309 persons, spread the teachings brought to them among their peers on the one hand, but on the other hand also by some leaving their homeland and going the way to the then Nepal, respectively North India, where they also spread the learned, but with only little success. Nevertheless, the spiritual doctrine has also spread there partly among a group of interested people and has been preserved for about 530 years, whereby the followers of the doctrine called themselves Bodhi for the sake of the doctrine and the change to the enlightened and awakened human being, which means enlightened and awakened. The teaching was received and then also learned by Siddhartha Gautama, that is to say, Siddhartha Gautama, but was not understood by him and transformed at his own discretion into a completely strange and unrealistic false teaching, whereby he integrated various good values of the spiritual teaching into his fantasy teaching. So it is to be understood that the values of the spiritual doctrine, which are partly listed in the Buddhism religion, do not refer to the well-known Buddhism, which was founded about 6 centuries before Emmanuel Chur, by Siddhartha Gautama and spread worldwide as a teaching tradition and religion. This teaching tradition and religion, however, are not much better than any other religion with its heresies and fantasies, because they are far from any reality and truth.
So it is clear that what I have written about the good and positive in Buddhism does not mean the confused teaching of Siddhartha Gautama and not the well-known Buddhism itself, which has between 350 and 500 million followers worldwide, and which is especially widespread in China, Bhutan, Japan, Cambodia, Laos, Mongolia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Korea, Thailand, Tibet, and Vietnam. My remarks and explanations basically refer to Buddhism enlightened, awakened, which was taught to a larger group of people in the north of early Burma as the doctrine of truth, the doctrine of the spirit, the doctrine of life, or the teaching of the spirit, or the teaching of the prophets, and which is no longer widely taught today, because there are no longer any followers of Buddhism.
This corresponds to what has been given since 1917. Now, I would like to ask you, what happens with these 2 sayings which are on the table and which I have read? Do these belong to the 2nd volume of your poems, proverbs, aphorisms, which Eva compiles and produces?
Yeah, they're part of it. Why do you ask?
I am interested in the extent of this work to date, which Eva only finishes on her own when you have gone your last way.
I do not know the exact size, but when Eva and I last talked about it, which was quite some time ago, it was about 80 A4 pages. My small government. Eva has the help of Piero, because he has set everything up on her computer so that she can prepare the book, and finally also give it to the correction round and in print, and therefore also publish it. It is solely her work that she wants to create and publish as a farewell and souvenir to me.
A very pleasant gesture which corresponds to her nature and the connection between her and you. But now that we talk about it, how's that biography of yours Bernadette's working on going? Their work is also important.
Bernadette works diligently on it, but this cannot be permanent, because she also has to bring the Figu time signs, open letters, overpopulation brochures, bulletins and special bulletins into the final versions in print production, etc., which takes a lot of time. This is in addition to various other things, which must also be done by her. Everything has to be corrected several times through the correction series, in which I am also included, whereby Bernadette then has to correct the spelling mistakes, etc., after each correction run.
This is known to me, and I follow that you and Bernadette do the main work for all the written works for all the books. Writings and Figu organizations, Bernadette for the processing and finishing of all the works, and you for the production of them.
That is true, yes, but all the others also have their tasks, which they perform voluntarily and without remuneration, and their work and commitment are not easy, but intensive and exhausting.
I also know that, and I would like to express my appreciation and thanks for all the work and commitment of all of them.
I also agree with this. Then I would like to address something which your father Shvath taught me, and which has always kept me high above the water despite the worst experiences, events, and situations throughout my life. By this I mean what he taught me with regard to maintaining the necessary regeneration processes regarding my aging process, body posture, and the body and its organs themselves in a healthy state. And I would like to address this now, because I would like to ask you to inform me privately about your latest knowledge about what I am going to talk about which, of course, no discussion report should be made, because I think it is only for my further education.
I can do that, of course, because I know from what you have just said, what it is about, what my father taught you.
Good, thanks. So the following? Over and over again I see how earthlings are decaying consciousness-thought-feeling ratio, wise, as well as physically and psychically rapidly when they get older, and that already beginning at the time when they become of age. However, being of age has nothing to do with being an adult, as is unfortunately generally assumed by the people of the world, because being of age is a legally stipulated age for young people, such as the 18th birthday of a person in Switzerland, etc. This means that young people of this age are considered to be of legal age and are therefore allowed by law to vote politically, drive and sign contracts. The truth is, however, that the Earth humans do not grow up in any way at the age of 18, but are only of full age according to the existing official laws, but are by no means grown up because the actual maturity begins much later, in a constantly cumulative way over the whole life. Adulthood itself normally does not begin until the age of 25 to 28, depending on the development of the human consciousness. Up to this point in time, calculated from the age of attainment of majority, the person is still in adolescence, after which at 25, 26, 27, or 28 years of age, the mental, emotional, and conscious adolescence begins, which continues throughout life. The fact is, then, that the effective maturity of consciousness does not begin until much later, both in the present time and in the time to come. Always later, because the limit in this regard is shifting further and further back, as I have noticed time and again since my youth with people and continue to recognize it in this way. If we look at adulthood, then it has nothing to do with the fact that humans are effectively adult in terms of consciousness, thought, psychology, and radium, as is usually mistakenly assumed by humans. Because adulthood does not effectively begin when biological maturation is completed, which is approximately completed at the beginning of the 20th year of life. At the end or attainment of adulthood, one can only speak of a biologically matured adulthood of the brain and nervous system, because at this age in no way can one speak of an effective adulthood with regard to various conscious, psychological, and, overall, all ratiomassic important processes. This is because these processes have not yet been completed, including social maturation, which is far from complete at the age of majority. It is also a fact that the entire development process in every respect and aspect runs through the whole of life, and only ends when death occurs. So it normally follows that learning is unstoppable throughout life, and humankind continues to evolve. This results in the fact that adulthood is not an accomplished state, but a factor which develops further and further as adulthood, and as a result the human being becomes more and more adult, consciously and comprehensively strong, as in the normal case also more and more knowledgeable, reasonable, and responsible, etc. So adulthood is not an accomplished state, but a lifelong process through which man normally grows more and more in maturity and autonomy, and thus develops or evolves throughout his entire life. But this is only possible if all or at least the majority of all influencing factors of consciousness, thoughts and feelings and the psyche controlled by their values are used and implemented in such a way that a permanent regeneration of the entire ratio, the intellect, the intelligence, the reason, the mind, the thoughts, feelings, psyche, and consciousness takes place, as well as the entire regeneration process of the body and all organs. However, the use of all the values resulting from everything can only be carried out, done, and implemented if all stress of any kind is avoided. And this because stress of any form and in any respect is dangerous and harmful to health and prevents any consciousness thought feel psych ratio-wise as well as physical regeneration process, which also has a negative effect on the aging process. So many diseases, sufferings and pains as well as the visible aging of the skin and the body, and thus the whole physical appearance of the human being can be based on it. Because the necessary consciousness thought feels psycho-ratio-wise regeneration processes do not take place, precisely because the human being simply neglects them and does not carry them out. Thus, in this regard, not fully consciously is anything necessarily done in terms of consciousness thought feelings, and therefore everything is neglected. Usually because there is a lack of knowledge about it, and consequently because nothing was taught, and nothing taught to the descendants through education in this regard. Therefore, even later in their youth and up to the time of beginning adulthood and in the lifelong period of consciousness thought, emotion, psych ratio, like adulthood, they have no idea of the whole thing and fail in sniveling and doubting and also see no success if they would seize the chance to change everything for the better for themselves, if they were pointed to the right thing with clear advice. That is why many earthlings also wind themselves into sniveling when they succumb to a suffering, an illness or some kind of pain, instead of strengthening themselves consciousness thought feeling psych ratio-wise, and thereby simply regard the evil infested by them as a normal occurrence, in order to perceive it only to such an extent that it does not constantly poking around consciously in the thoughts and feelings, but becomes a trifle and thus triggers the necessary regeneration process. Your father Satipatthäna explained that physical and mental emotional psychological ailments, diseases and pains correspond fundamentally to influencing factors, which are to be considered in their meaning probably, in order to be able to fight them consciousness thought, emotional, psycho-ratio, wise or also medicamentously, but they should never be overrated, but must always be kept under control. And that is exactly what has to be implemented in every good, positive, and reasonable way in daily life. As a result, only when consciousness and its powers are used consciously, as well as healthy thoughts and feelings are nurtured, can a comprehensive and valuable regeneration process take place with regard to physical health, thoughts, feelings, and aging. Satipatthäna also said that even lifelong sufferings that cannot be cured do not cause people psychological problems, and that they can easily endure great physical pain if they consciously adjust to perceiving it only from a distance, so to speak. And that really works, as I have experienced from my own experience since my boyhood and still do today. By consciously coping with the factors influencing consciousness, thoughts, feelings, psyche, and the entire ratio that interfere with regeneration, Satipatthäna explained, as I still remember very clearly, that physical organic wear and tear is not stopped, but is slowed down just as much as the entire aging process. He mentioned a hormone whose name I do not know anymore, nor what kind of stress it causes, because it's been so long ago, and you can already do it once.
I forgot some things, I know. But I remember this conversation which my father had with you, for when I searched the annals for the records of your first conversation, I read much, including everything concerning the matter which you cite and for which I may later, privately at your request, make further statements. But what you have just mentioned is that the name of the physical wear and tear that you no longer use is the stress hormone cortisol known in earthly medicine, which causes allostatic stress. The result is that the blood pressure may increase and the body adapts to stressful situations, but it opposes the external demands. In this way, he does not remain in a homeostasis. That is to say, not in an equilibrium, but falls into an allostasis, that is to say, into an imbalance or into an altered constitution in order to cope with the external requirements. Only when the stress is over does the body regain its balance. However, if the requirement or reaction persists, then the entire body suffers chronically from its own allostatic stress.
Thank you for the interesting teaching and the mention of the name I had forgotten. I also want to thank you that you always use the terms and concepts of earthly chemistry and medicine, etc. in your explanations. Because I can look up and understand something with them, which certainly also applies to the people who have access to the discussion reports. But what I would like to say about the whole, according to what Svath taught me, is that if the conscious mental emotional psycho ratio regeneration processes are not carried out, a rapid aging of all bodily factors appears, such as the aging of the skin, the muscle tissue, and the bone substance. Maybe you can tell us what the bone substance is made of. It would certainly also be important to know what factors are important for human aging in connection with what I have said.
The bone substance consists of an organic bone matrix and hydroxyapatite, or inorganic mineral salts, which are the actual basic substance of bone. With regard to aging, I can explain that the ends of the chromosomes or the telomeres are responsible for the aging of the cells. These telomeres therefore determine whether they slow down, or shorten aging, depending on what results from regeneration processes or from not carrying them out.
Thank you. I'll take care of it. So back to what we are actually talking about. If consciousness, thought, feel, psych ratio regeneration processes are carried out, this ensures that stress is reduced before it even becomes apparent, and certainly not in a negative way. Consequently, if possible, the buildup of stress should already be avoided, which is the most effective way of staying healthy of consciousness. Thoughts, feelings, and psyche as well as of mind and reason, and no laborious stress reduction should be considered or carried out. Nor should medical, psychological, and psychiatric help be called in. If, however, no attention is paid to the fact that no stress is built up or that any stress that has arisen is not relieved in time, then this can have very serious health consequences of various kinds. Because even moderate stress is sufficient to severely reduce self-control, and even fatal consequences can occur in the long term, such as suicide. Stress and rapid aging, however, can be counteracted by maintaining the consciousness, thought, emotion, psych ratio world in good function, including the cultivation of good interpersonal relationships, social participation, content-rich, valuable conversations, reading, studying, and learning from books and writings with good, valuable reading material, which can also prevent rapid aging, as well as walks in the great outdoors and interest in fauna and flora. Natural, healthy, and varied food as well as relaxation exercises, and a certain amount of recreational exercise also contribute in the long term to slowing down aging and preventing stress. That's basically what I had to say.
Which, as usual with you, is good and valuable in terms of explanation, but should also be sufficient for understanding.
Thank you. I'll take care of it. But there are now some more questions for me concerning the Orgone, if I may ask.
What if it does not concern our directives?
No, not that. I think at least if you may answer, to what extent negative and destructive things result from an Orgone misuse?
I can and may answer that. The worst that could happen is planetary destruction.
In what way can you answer that?
No.
I thought so, so thank you and good. Another question refers to the Orgone itself or its origin. Since your last visit, I have been surfing the internet and have read a lot about Empire and Orgone, and I also came across that Orgone is called life energy. If it does not concern your directives in this regard, could you at least tell us whether it really is such a life energy, where it effectively comes from, and whether it is universally present?
An answer in this regard is compatible with our directives, so I may say that it is in no way a life energy as you have read, nor is it the cosmic electromagnetic life energy, which is of a spirit-energetic nature and 100% positive and 100% negative, which you yourself excluded in our last conversation. The Orgone energy that Reich discovered is an energy already known from our early ancestors, which we of course name differently and which we have used since its discovery with regard to its manifold applicability. Usefulness and usability also for the benefit of our peoples as well as the fauna and flora, and thus in a peaceful way. This energy, however, is not a life energy, as I mentioned earlier, but a regeneration energy in the sense of a regeneration indicator to maintain and restore a natural state, which is caused by a certain reaction arising from the orgone energy, but I am not allowed to name the status nascendi of the reaction, because this would be a violation of our directives. It would also be dangerous, because if I would give an explanation, then I would point out certain research possibilities for earthly scientists, from which great disaster would result, because these scientists and also other power-obsessed and renowned addicted Earth humans would produce dangerous products from the orgone energy, through which enormous misery and disaster would be caused.
I can imagine, but thank you. And what you say is all well and good, but I cannot start with status nascendi, at least not with nascendi. Status is familiar to me and means condition, but for me, nascendi is a foreign word that I do not know.
Of course, I can explain to you what status nascendi means because it is a Latin term and means state of origin. And in the sense of my explanation, reactive state of origin.
Thank you, I understand. Unfortunately, I am not a stag with regard to the Latin language, but only a small man who has few terms and words in his educational repertoire. But what interests me now regarding the orgone? Where does it come from? Reich said yes, as I know from the internet, that it was primordial cosmic, and thus cosmically original, so to speak. Cosmically primordial, and thus universal since all the beginning or emergence of the cosmos or universe.
The statement primordial cosmic does not correspond to the correctness, because as already explained, the orgone is an energy, which exists very well universally, but is not spread universally. Orgone forms only in mixed form biologically and chemically on planets or worlds, which are able to carry a nature with fauna and flora. The radiation energies of the mother celestial bodies responsible for these worlds or planets are of indispensable importance, because only in the interaction of their radiation energies with the necessary prerequisites of the planets can orgone come into being. So not only the solar energies are necessary, which reach the planet as radiation, but also the whole biological nature and thus its fauna and flora, as well as the planetary geochemistry and petrochemistry, that is to say, the chemistry of rock and stone oils, as well as the atmospheric and water chemistry. And these statements set out everything I am responsible for saying.
Thank you, dear friend, that's enough for me, because that's all I need to know. Then I would like to come another time also on the topic Jack the Ripper, because as always there are again and again specialists who put up new theories and assertions who Jack the Ripper was. For example, there is a certain Dr. Gareth Norris who claims that he can prove that a certain Charles Allen Lechmere d. 1920 was the killer Jack the Ripper. During various conversations, which you and I had privately and openly see Volume 11, page 373, Pleiadisch Plejarenische Contact Berichte, it was explained, however, that a man named Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, born the 27th of May, 1850, executed the 15th of November, 1892, was the mass murderer Jack the Ripper, who was then captured, sentenced to death, and executed.
These assertions are known to me and are based solely on confused speculations based on pseudo-forensic assumptions and speculative constructs. This is a construct that does not yield any empirically recognizable facts within the pseudo-scientifically, pseudo-forensically constructed presumption theory. This presumption theory construct is based on a mental or even theoretical and imaginative nature that is alienated from any reality. This means, then, that the facts in question, as presented by the various know-it-alls and specialists, do not exist, but are only thought up from various wrongly assumed and interpreted indicators or facts that are not comprehensible. The false assertion, then, that the man Charles Allen Lechmere was Jack the Ripper who actually existed and died in 1920 and never murdered, as our investigations at the time, which were carried out by my father because this Leshmir was also suspected at the time, revealed actually corresponds only to an imaginative latent construct, or subliminal, hidden, and concealed exploration of something unknown, or an assumption following which it is a false operationalization. And in Jack the Ripper's case, this is done by the know-it-alls and experts creating false concretizations of theoretical hypotheses and assumptions in connection with misinterpreted, observable, and measurable local conditions, whereby, however, the effective external influences, such as the presence and action of persons, are completely misinterpreted by the imagination.
Wow, that's an explanation I have got to digest, but I can understand. Did you think you were in an auditorium?
You think that I
think so, because it would also be easier, namely to simply say that the know-it-alls and experts, who try to reconstruct history in a forensic theoretical way, simply take the existing circumstances such as street, trees, houses, and the place of the victim into account. They look at everything else all around only in a presumptuous way, like people who are at the victim's place or appear in some other way, who prove them as such with suspicions through false suspicions, and also judge their actions completely wrong and award them behaviors, etc., which do not apply to them.
You're right, it could be said so in a short way.
Exactly, just who is Charlie? When there was an attack on Charlie Hebdo in Paris, half the world showed solidarity with Je suis Charlie or I am Charlie. And recently this also happens with Orlando or I am Orlando, where 49 people were murdered in a restaurant. How do you feel about that? For my part, I find the whole thing childish, ridiculous, and primitive as an expression of solidarity.
I can only express myself on this in such a way that I define these sayings as pubescent linguistic expression.
Well, then we have about the same taste in that. What's being talked about as I am is irrational and pubescent, as you say. So it does not correspond to how the growing up person, that is, those who are already 25 or more years old, would have to be peculiar, who would basically have to talk about being compassionate for etc. Because compassion is what it's about to be effective, but not about being what compassion is raised for.
How you explain this, I can agree with you, because to be compassionate corresponds on the one hand to the right way, and on the other hand also to the way of expression of a person who is growing up.
Growing up and effectively growing up are two different things. Unfortunately, when many people reach adulthood and enter life, they think that they are adult, although this is only the case physically, but not in terms of the conscious development of knowledge and wisdom. This lasts during the whole life and thus also the growing up, as I already explained regarding the physical and consciousness thought-feel-psycho-ratio-massogen regeneration process.
Which we do not need to talk about anymore.
Of course not. I did not want to point it out, but only my previous presentation. So now I come to the next question, which refers to one of the 4 groups or groupings, of which there are actually 5, whereby in this relation there is a double grouping, but which you both call the same, namely, future Earth. This may be a little confusing, but it is acceptable and does not refer to my question, because it is aimed at whether you are allowed to tell me openly whether you now know where this 4th group from outside Earth comes from.
We know that by now, but
I thought to myself, then not officially, was just a question. Furthermore, I think it has now become clear to me why you have always talked about grouping on the one hand, or about grouping on the other. Because if I have understood correctly, then you understand group to mean a closed community and in a grouping several groups of the same or different kind, don't you? In that case, I have misunderstood you for years.
you obviously did, because what you are saying is true. The term group is to be understood as a smaller or larger number of members coming together or belonging together, whereby these people form an ordered unit or a community. A circle of people who belong together on the basis of certain similarities because they have joined together on the basis of common interests and goals, as is the case with the Figu core group. On the other hand, a grouping forms a closed combination of several groups of the same character. For example, the Figu core parent group and the Figu passive group, study groups and interest groups. Thus, in this sense, a grouping comprises several like-minded groups. On the other hand, however, a grouping can also include a number of groups which are of completely different nature and interests, and are therefore not a closed unit, but which in themselves form an autonomous, and independent whole, although these groups as a whole have one thing in common.
Interesting. But annoying for me, because all these years I have misunderstood your, and generally your Plejaren interpretation of group and grouping, and I did not ask Latchkop for an explanation earlier. But now it is clear to me what is meant by group and grouping, so if I have understood correctly, you are also talking about several groups in relation to the other groupings that you keep mentioning. So I was thoroughly mistaken that there were only 4 groups, because in reality there must be several of them. But then there are the grouping of the Earth foreigners and the 2 other groupings that are based on earthly things. Is it permissible to speak openly about this?
What you say is correct, but we can only talk about it in a private way. You know.
Yes, I understand, because although I misunderstood you for years, I did not exactly fall on my head and know that you have to talk about your directives again. But if I repeat, then you have spoken of 1 group or of 4 specific groups on the one hand. Therefore, the speech was of a single group or of 4 groups from a specific grouping, as for example of the grouping Future Earth, which consists of 2 groups. And according to what I now know, the other groupings must comprise more than just 2 groups, perhaps 3, 4, 5 or more.
Yes, that is how it is.
So my knowledge has increased by another iota again. Then something else. Your father Svath took me to the Grand Canyon in the USA in his pearship once. It was in the summer of 1947, if I remember correctly. Just in the hot summer where 47 degrees of heat were measured, and explained to me that this canyon was about 5.7 million years old and had been created by the Colorado River. The Colorado River is said to have originated from the Rocky Mountains or somewhere from a huge lake in the Rocky Mountains, which had overflowed and run out after a long time and finally disappeared. And why I bring this up is based on the fact that still today researches are carried out and always new statements are made regarding the age of the Grand Canyon, which amount to up to over 70 million years. Regarding Svath's explanation, I think you've done some research and found out when and how the Grand Canyon was formed, based on the layering, etc. of the canyon, and perhaps also by traveling through the past.
That was indeed the case. Because even in the early days, we carried out such research on objects on Earth that were of interest to us, which we still do today, because there are always significant geological changes. These are often not noticed by earthly scientists, as this also refers to all biological fauna and flora conditioned, as well as geological things, which destroy all existence on Earth evermore by the machinations of the overpopulation. So already at early times of the 16th century, our scientists determined the age of the Grand Canyon. And then what my father explained to you is true and correct, but the claims of earthly scientists are wrong with their statements of the high age of the Grand Canyon.
That's what I wanted to know. Thanks. Those were all the questions.
Then we can turn to the private conversation.
Naturally.